Nice to see you again. So today the topic that is problems of in social research, objectivity and subjectivity. Now let me begin by telling one thing. I will prefer to use the word challenge rather than problems. I'll tell you why. In life, I'm talking out of my own experience, okay? And all of us will have gone through this. If you think that something is a problem, it will appear like that, and you keep on feeling that you are not able to achieve the target. Whereas if you use the word challenge means it throws up, before you some questions. It will also put you in some difficult situations, and invariably we will all try and look for answers. So let's say, what are the challenges we face as social researchers? This is one thing. First and foremost, I want to clarify that, yes, there are problems because we are dealing with human beings. The big difference between social research and research in natural and physical sciences is that, see, while those scientists are, I'm not calling them lifeless, or I'm not saying that they don't have challenges. I'm not at all, doing that. But think of, our position as compared to a scientist who works in a lab, maybe a chemistry lab, maybe a physics lab, or maybe a zoology lab or a botany lab. While, many of these scientists and people coming from natural and physical sciences, they say, oh, what kind of research do you do in sociology? You don't have a lab. We cannot have a lab. You cannot, psychology and a few other subjects, probably you can you can study people and behavior in a laboratory situation. But otherwise, we are people, sociologists, anthropologists, or other social scientists. We are studying people in their natural settings. Now, one of the greatest anthropologists, who kind of is known as the father of fieldwork in sociology and social anthropology, Malinowski, he said that the field work is the study of people in their natural habitat. You can go and sit in a laboratory for 24 hours. Nobody is going to ask you either to leave or to stop working. But even if you are ready to go to the field, live there, stay there, not just for 24 hours, but for 24 months or 24 years or 24 days, your work depends on how those people with whom you want to work are ready to cooperate with you. So this is the unique feature of social research, is that the researcher is a human being, and the persons who are subject to our studies are also human beings. And when two or more human beings are involved, you know the kind of relationships, conflicts, or clashes. So you may become very great friends with some of your field, people in the field. But there are also people whom you may not be comfortable with. We all say, don't we say as human beings, okay, I'm okay with this person, but I don't feel comfortable with that person. I feel, this person is a friend. Whereas somebody else, you say, I don't know, I'm not comfortable. I don't like his behavior or her behavior. I can't relate. You see, that is the word. Remember, I think in one of my lectures, you also asked me that question. What is rapport? RAPPORT, rapport. What is rapport? Building a rapport is the biggest challenge in social research. What is rapport? See, as a researcher, of course, I have a clear-cut goal. Like types of research, I said I either want to collect data for my PhD, or I want to collect data for evaluation study, or I just want to do some market survey. Whatever my purpose may be, my goal is clear. But my subjects must understand that it is very important for them to cooperate. See, that is building the rapport. And that is a big challenge. It's not easy because everybody will not accept you so easily. When you go to a field, when you go to a family, or when you start speaking to an individual, when you start, going to any institution for that matter, the first question will be, why do you want? What are you going to do with my data? And nowadays, many people will directly ask you, what am I going to get out of it? I am going to spend my time, my energy, information sharing. Tell me what I will get out of it. Who knows? After collecting data from me, after taking all the information that you require, you might just go. Afterwards, you may not even care for me. And social researchers have had very difficult situations. I myself have faced. When we have gone to certain fields, we have been threatened. We have been literally beaten. I'm in a research that I am doing and still doing. Now it is a different matter. They're all friends, and for me, it's become my second home. All that is different. But when I went, I remember that the one leader of that community, he came with a huge stick, you see, like this. And he said, go away. I don't want you to do any research with women in our community. We are not talking to strangers. I don't know why you have come here. So, for a social researcher, the big challenge, or as I told you, we will not call it a problem, because you see, it is possible to overcome. In any group, there will always be some people who are not going to cooperate with you, who will be very, what shall I say, they will maintain distance. They'll not make you feel comfortable. They are not going to cooperate with you. They're not ready to share data with you. But that's a small minority. We'll have to convince them. Now I'm going to another point. I said rapport building or establishment of rapport. What is rapport in social science research? It means, see, just as I consider my subject important for me, the respondents or the persons who are going to give us our data, the persons from whom we are going to gather information, must also realize that it is important for me. That is rapport. See, friendship is different. People may be ready to sit and talk to you for hours, but if they're not ready to share the information that you are looking for, because you know how the research process happens. We have a subject, we have a problem, and then you have a hypothesis, you have a sample, you have tools, maybe a questionnaire, maybe interview schedule, maybe participant observation, maybe case study, whatever. So the biggest, as I told you, challenge is to be accepted by the persons, by the people with whom you are going to do your research. That is number one. And second is, even to gain entry into a research space, as I call it, it's not an easy task. I don't know. I think I have told you about Evans Pritchard, the great social anthropologist who wrote on the New Years of Africa. See, Evans Pritchard was a British anthropologist, and he wanted to study the New Years. He did not know the language. And it was not easy. They would have killed him had he just, gate crashed into the community. So we are told that he waited outside for months on end. And finally, when one New Year came out, he caught him and took him to England, kept him with in his house or wherever, and learnt the language, taught him English. And through this New Year, he gained entry into the community. And we are one of the best, anthropological creations by Evans Pritchard, who was at Oxford. He was a student of Radcliffe Brown. And we have many such stories of anthropologists, especially, who have gone into distant locations. When you go to the field, many times nobody will even look at you. They will just ignore you. Or, there will be one or two persons who will try to be too friendly. They will come to you, they will talk to you, they'll say, I'm so powerful here. I'm going to take you around, I will help you. But you see, another big challenge for the social researcher, then this is also closely related to the question of subjectivity and objectivity. So let me also explain those two concepts and relate the challenge to subjectivity and objectivity issues. See, so the challenge comes because to be objective when you are dealing with other human beings is a very difficult task. It's not so easy. So what is now let's come to the two concepts of what is subjectivity and what is objectivity. Because the entire success of a social research effort depends upon being objective. Now, what is objective? To be free from bias. See, as human beings, we all have our preferences, our choices. We like somebody, we don't like somebody. And we already have opinions, that we have formed in our mind. Many times you form those opinions without even having any personal experience. Let us say I keep on coming and talking to you about somebody in a very wrong light. That person is like that, don't go there, that is dangerous, they won't talk to you, they won't look at you, they will do this, they will not do that. I can keep on influencing you. And that creates what is called bias. And all of us, at some point of time in our life or the other, we all become victims of prejudice. What is prejudice? We prefer some people and we don't like some people. Very clearly we say, Anna, I don't like this person. Do you know him? No, I don't know him, but I still don't like him. And we make statements like, see, he looks so good. He looks so, nice. How do you know? You don't know. You don't have any personal experience. Like that, when you don't like somebody also, you'll say, I don't like that person. Many times we say, he hasn't done anything to me. But still, I'm not okay. So you see, human behavior is the most difficult, As students of sociology, I think one lesson I have learned, and many of us have learned and will learn, is that the most difficult to gauge is human behavior. In fact, especially in a field situation, one day, everybody is so nice to you. When you talk to them, they will be ready to part with information. They will give you all the details that you are seeking. Now you get carried away. Oh, my work is done. And then when you go there the next day, there may be many of them may not even look at you. They are in their own world. So, you see, human behavior is very difficult to understand And but our job is to analyze human behavior. Why, human beings behave in a certain manner. You have heard of this famous scholar, Irving Goffman. Or Goffman, you see, he says this world is a theater. Society is a theater. And we are all actors. There is a front stage and there is a backstage. And we are all behaving in a certain manner. We are all acting. He calls, all of us are human actors. The true picture comes out only at the backstage. So to think that somebody is very nice, somebody is not nice, somebody's behavior you can predict, somebody's behavior you can't predict, all those conclusions you should never come to. So objectivity is a quality. Objectivity is a quality which you have to develop. That in spite of your personal preferences or personal prejudices, you are not going to be influenced in your research by those preferences, prejudices. If you are selecting a sample, you don't say, I'm going to take this person because I like him. Or you are not going to say, I don't like him, and so I will not include him in my sample. If you are, for example, using a random sample method, and let us say my number comes, I am chosen randomly. If you are subjective, if you are biased, if you are prejudiced, you'll say, oh, I have to go and talk to her, is it? I don't like her. No. See, the biggest challenge in social research, first is building the rapport, being accepted by the group which you are studying. And the second and more important thing is to maintain your objectivity. You have to go with an open mind. This thing is very easily said, more easily said than achieved, they say. Because as human beings, we all have our preferences. We all have our prejudices. We all, are very possessive about certain ideas of ours. And we are not going to change. So, but good research can be done only when you are objective. When you don't allow your personal, choices, personal preferences, personal likes and personal dislikes to impact your research. Because subjectivity is a very dangerous thing. And for a social researcher, in every stage of research, there is provision, there is a possibility that he or she becomes subjective, right from the choice of the problem to the preparation of the report, the language that you use, the content of the report. You can be very subjective. And, it's human nature. There are many people who don't study certain subjects because they are not comfortable, they don't like. So, because social research is a human-to-human interaction, it is a process that involves interaction between two or more individuals, two or more groups, two or more institutions, two or more communities. There is a lot of scope for introduction of subjectivity. So the biggest challenge for a social researcher is to have an objective bent of mind. As I told you very clearly, I can say that you have to be extremely objective. You should not be prejudiced. You should not do this. You should not do that. But to put it into practice is a challenge. And the best researchers in social sciences are those that are undertaken by the researcher with a very open mind. Many a time we go to the field imagining the wrong things. We imagine that this is the kind of data we are going to encounter. But the field may have many surprises for us. See, hypothesis, remember when I talked about hypothesis, I said there is a group of people who are not comfortable with hypothesis formulation because they say it is, you are prejudging the field. Okay, hypothesis may guide you, it might give you a lead, all that is true. But if your hypothesis, if you have a hypothesis, and if you want to prove that at any cost your assumption is correct, that is subjectivity. What is hypothesis? Basically, a hypothesis is only a tentative solution which can be accepted when it is tested against the empirical data. Only if your data prove that your hypothesis is correct, then it becomes a theory. You can say that it is accepted. But there are many people who have that innate fear, what if my hypothesis is rejected? So what? It is rejected, that's all, accept it. You say, this is what I thought. But, well, the reality is different. The field has some other truth for you. That is why I told you the field, a research field, always has many surprises for the researcher. And only a person with an objective mind, what is objectivity as opposed to subjectivity? They say calling a spade a spade. See, many sponsors of research projects now, they don't want you to tell them the truth. They will expect you to write your report in such a way that it will not expose certain wrong things that are happening. This is true of many sponsored researchers. And this is also a challenge in social research. If you are doing a PhD for yourself, that's okay. But if you're working for a government agency, or if you're working for any other paid research project, they may not like you to tell the truth. For example, evaluation of the government project. I will share one, example with you. My own experience. We were working, I will not take any names. We were working on impact of NREGA, MGNREGA. Everybody knows MGNREGA on farm forestry. Farm forestry means, this is a scheme in NREGA where they would give saplings, seedlings, etc. to be planted in fields. Now, our study carried out in different parts of the state showed that the survival rate in many parts of the state, for various reasons, was not more than 2% or 4%. And when the draft report was submitted to the concerned department, the person who was there, who was responsible for this, he came running to me because I was the team leader, and we had a team that had undertaken this work. He's saying, ma'am, I'm going to lose my job. He told me, you will make me lose my job. Because when the people who are above me, when they know that survival rate is only 2%, they will say, what are you doing? So please don't do this. Please don't write like that. But I said, that's what the data are showing. We have worked so hard in the field. We have personally gone and checked. And so we're not going to tell lies. Let the state find out why survival rate in certain parts of the state is only 2% of the plantations, of the seedlings and saplings given by the forest department. Why, MGNREGA is not working here? Is there a problem with the people? Is there a problem with the rain? Then they started, saying, see, it's not our problem. There's also the failure of rainfall, etc. Then, when they started discussing with us like that, I felt sorry for them because people also have to be responsible. What we did was we went and checked the rainfall records, of that region for the last couple of years. I said, okay, let us give their point of view also credence. We surely don't want them to get into trouble because the officers started shouting at them right in our presence. He said, what are you doing? You are supposed to go and inspect. You are supposed to keep track. And some of those farms are located in the vicinity of the forest. So the wild animals come and destroy. We knew all this, we had written, but ultimately they wanted the data to be stated in terms of quantitative, information. They wanted data to be presented in terms of percentages, etc., to understand, to evaluate the success of that project. In some parts, it was doing very well. So then there were natural factors. Some of them were induced by nature-related factors. Others were all human. And there was definitely lackluster performance by the machinery, office machinery in some parts. So you see, like this, I have myself had challenges, many places where in my work with government programs, I have been asked by the concerned people, oh, we are getting money from World Bank, we are getting money from this organization and that organization. If you write like that, we will get into trouble. I once had a fight and quit also. Because this is a huge project, and I was doing an evaluation as an independent social scientist. I was not attached to any organization. They wanted it. The sponsor wanted an independent assessment by a sociologist. And I found that whatever money was given by the sponsor was not used. And when I wrote that, the officer he became paranoid, he became quite hostile, What is this, madam? If you write like this, what will happen to us? So I said, okay, I'm quitting because I can't cook up. So that is the word, one of the challenges, those who are subjective can cook up data. Those who are objective will write what it is. May please somebody, may not please somebody. It may shock you, it may shock others. But objectivity is not being influenced by personal factors. That's all, simple. And objectivity is not a quality which you should have only when you are doing research. In life also, you should be objective. See, for a sociologist, the biggest challenge again is that you should not become one-sided. You should have a mind to look at a particular issue from different angles. You should consider that this is not the only possibility. There may be other possibilities. It is important for you to realize that there are unseen what shall I say, points of view, which you would not have guessed when you actually enter the field. So if you keep your mind open, ready to receive information from all sides, this is especially when you're doing ethnographic studies. It's very difficult to be completely objective. In fact, like studies by Dubey or M.N. Srinivas, if you read all that, you will see that they have been, they have also faced these challenges. See, when you go to a field, for example, I will give you an example, how it is difficult, as I said, it's challenge. You have to do it. There is no question of compromising on this. For a researcher who is an outsider, remember that in sociology and in research, we are always using these concepts, outsider versus the insider. As a researcher, I'm an outsider. So, well, let us say I'm doing an ethnographic study of a particular community or particular village in some part of the country. Now, when I go into that village, if I have chosen that village as, my case study, I'll have to live there. Now, as an outsider, I have to find a place. I have to find a place to set up my house because I need to live there. I need to observe. I have to be a participant observer. Many times I have to be a non-participant observer. I have to use mixed methodology, as I called it that day. So I go. Now, where do I live? Is there a house? I'm not able to travel every day from my place to this field. Then it's at a distance. And it's also important for social researchers to feel the field. See, the lab, for example, is a dry space. You may have attachment with your workspace. I don't deny that. But it's not a human space. But for us social scientists, we are dealing with human spaces. A village is not just a geographical location for us, but it is a human. It's a space that kind of facilitates human relations. So when I go into the village, where do I live? See, for most of us who come from urban spaces, you naturally look for at least some minimum necessities. So let us say that there is some space in the village where these basic amenities are available, and naturally your choice falls on that. So when you go and live there, you choose to live there. You go and speak to the owner. There may be somebody, who is trying to negotiate for you, who will take you. You will talk to this person, and then you will set up your base there. You will set up your, what you call as field station in that particular place. Now, you should remember as a social researcher that you have set up your field base there, but your data sources are from the entire village. You cannot identify too much with anybody. But naturally, when you live in that place, let us say there is an issue of caste, there is the issue of class, there is the issue of land ownership, there is an issue of power, inequality. There is a hierarchy in a village, social structure, as all of us students of sociology know. So let us say that the person with whom you are staying or in whose house, you pay rent, you take care of your cooking, etc. You kind of, are using the physical space because it's available. But human nature is such that they will identify you with that particular owner of the house. If he belongs to a certain caste, if he is a landowner, if, the other people in the village are working for him, if it is a Dalit, versus upper caste kind of a relationship structure that prevails there, if it is a tribal Hadi that is adjacent to that village. So all these issues you will have to take into consideration. So as a social researcher, you'll have to be in, but keep your distance. You cannot align yourself with anybody too much, nor can you maintain too much of a distance because you have to mingle. They should feel free. But then many people may not be ready to come and speak to you in that space because they feel uncomfortable with that man. They feel that he's, he may be a panchayat president, he may be a landowner, he may be the employer. And, definitely that person will also try to use his influence. That family will try to use its influence and try to tell you, be careful of this person, be careful of that person, and bring their local politics to get you into, what shall I say, may not face in a lab. But in an open field with which we are dealing, as I told you, the first challenge is the challenge of acceptance. And the second one is, even after you're accepted and set up some base there, you cannot, have that close relationships only with select people. Many researchers get tempted. They get carried away because they think, oh, here is a friend, and you have to depend on somebody because you don't know the location basically. So you will need somebody to guide you through the village or the wherever, the space which you have chosen. There is the issue of language. If you are comfortable and familiar, it's fine. But then if that's an alien, a language with which you're not familiar, you'll have to have a translator, a local person who will kind of, be a bridge between you and the community. So for a human researcher, one of the biggest threats is subjectivity. And we all tend to bring our personal preferences, personal choices, and likes and dislikes, as I told you. Somewhere, we make that mistake. And even in looking at, participant observation, for example, which is used a lot by ethnographers and studies which are community-based in our subject, you will see that we tend to take sides. And by doing that, we don't realize we are distancing ourselves from others. See, in a field locale where I have been working, there is a particular forest program that is the subject of our study. So we were looking at the participation of women in this particular program. Okay. So when a committee was formed, it was called the Village Forest Committee. In Bengal also you have this program, JFPM. Bengal is again one of the states where it was introduced quite early. So in the Village Forest Committee, there were members, women members were there. It was the mandate of that policy that the Village Forest Committee had to have women representatives. And as a member of that committee, everybody was equal. The hierarchy in the social structure of that village had no role to play, at least theoretically speaking. But when we started our work, when we went to attend the meetings, we either found women from the landless groups missing, or when they came for the meeting, they were not ready to speak up. And the women from the landowning classes, they were not ready to share space with these women who worked as landless agricultural labor in their plantations. So you see how gender intersects with class, intersects with caste, intersects with power relations. I still remember, when we were doing a study for, there was a bonded labor was abolished in, in Karnataka. This happened in the late 90s or early 2000s. So they wanted us to do a study on many of these young children, who were working as bonded labor were brought to their homes. So the impact of that decision. They wanted us to find out whether these kids were really staying with their parents, whether they were being sent to school, or, something had happened. So they wanted a completely unconnected third party. These are all called third party studies. This is a very good opportunity for us, young researchers like you in future. Many opportunities will open up. So we were doing this study in a particular district in Karnataka, which is known for its feudal landlords and caste differences, caste distances, and all that. So they had given us the list of villages from which these children have been rescued and brought to their parental homes. Now, in one such village, there was this big landlord, in whose house many of these were working as bonded labor because their parents had borrowed money from him. And naturally, there was a kind of a divide in that village between the landowner and those landless laborers who were working. So when we went, when our research team, a colleague of mine and I were leading that team, but we went there and along with our students. And when we got down from the vehicle, the first persons to meet us, they were the people from the landless labor households, who were and children who had been rescued as bonded labor were from their houses. So when they met us, near the entrance of the village from where we stopped our vehicle and got down, we could see that we were being watched. Okay. And we did not want to go straight and meet that village headman because, we didn't want to be identified with power structures there and caste structures. So people came to us, they talked to us, and they shared their experiences. They were unhappy that, this man was exploiting their helplessness for a very long time, etc. But as a landowner, as a politician, he was also a politician outright. He expected that any newcomer to the village must first go and meet him. We did not, because we had made a conscious decision that we first relate ourselves to the people, not to the headman of the village, who was a powerful person. So we found that we were being watched. His people, they also have their own group, etc. And we talked to, of course, we had decided we will meet him also, because any good research, an objective researcher is one who takes all versions. So after talking to these people, when we went and met him, he said, I was watching. I knew you would come, But do you know the system here? He said, he told me that any newcomer must come and meet me, because we come to our house, have a cup of coffee, have breakfast, take our, you have to accept the thing from our house, etc. He said, yeah, I know all that, but we have no personal interest here. All of you are equal for us. We have come here for collecting data. And we have to listen to different points of view. And so we are there. He was unhappy, but then, he did speak. And you know what he said? Where will they go? Let me see, okay, these kids who worked with us in my house have been taken away, no doubt. They must have told you all those stories about how they worked for us, how we exploited them and all that. But let me see where they'll go. They have to come back here. How long? Because they don't have that kind of resource, the capital, as we call that in economics. They don't have the capital to invest on cultivating their lands. So they will come back. They will come back to me. And you mark my words, he tells me, these, boys who have been taken away from here will ultimately return to my house and work as farm labor in my house. See? But we cannot take sides. So an objective researcher is one who never takes sides with data, doesn't make an attempt to prove that his or her hypothesis is the right one. If it is wrong, say it's wrong. And in selection of the sample, as I told you, in every stage of social research, there is provision for introduction of bias or subjectivity. Subjectivity is you are not impartial. You are taking sides. You will hold on to your point, where irrespective of the fact that empirical data will prove you wrong. And you take sides with your subjects. See, an objective researcher is always one who doesn't try and influence, the field, nor is he going to be influenced by that. He very cleverly has to balance the insider-outsider roles. Now, these things are very easily said. They look like sound like an ideal situation. But I will say that this is what you are expected to follow. These are the qualities which we should develop. And that is why right from day one, I am insisting that a good researcher is one who goes to the field even before he or she starts the work, plans the research process, selects the sample, formulates one or two or three, as the case may be, hypothesis. But the problem starts when your contact with the field begins only when data collection starts. And nowadays, it has become quite a practice to hire people to do field work. Look at all the great works that have been produced in our subject. When, some of the world's most well-known social scientists have gone and stayed in the field and collected the data under the most grueling circumstances. The other day I was telling you about Professor Scarlett Epstein. Scarlett Epstein was from UK. And what about her classic works? The first book she wrote was called Economic Development and Social Change in a Mandya village, which is, I told you, close to Mysore. And Professor Epstein used to come back every 10 years. My favorite book of hers is, called South India Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. You see, every 10 years, Professor Epstein came back, and she didn't live in the comfort of this city. She just came, traveled all the way from London to Bangalore, and at airport, from there directly to the field. And she produced some of the best, field studies. And all of you are aware of all those books by Bailey, and then M.N. Srinivas, J.C. Dubey, and some of the more recent works. All those studies by Amartya Sen and his associates. See, you can give any number of very good examples of good research. So, before I stop and let you ask me questions, all I say is, I repeat, let's not say it's a problem, because these are bound to be there. When you deal with human beings, you have to be prepared. We have all faced initial resistance from the field, from some people. Not everybody will resist you. There will always be those who are ready to help you, who are curious, who will ask you questions, who will say, okay, I'll take you around and I'll show you everything, I'll be with you, etc. But there will also be resistance, because remember that research, this is a very important point for all of us. Research always brings out certain truths which otherwise are not known. That is the very purpose of research. It's not that you are doing this for the first time and you're the only one to be doing it. Perhaps you are expected to give new points of view. And always, knowledge, when new knowledge is created, it challenges what? It challenges power structures, it challenges patriarchy, it challenges inequality, it challenges, it kind of brings to the fore the subaltern voices, as we call them. A simple narrative, can tell us many truths. So what I want you to do is, please remember that working with human beings is always a challenge. But I won't call it a problem. It is an opportunity. Call it an opportunity to know your society, to know your fellow human beings better, and to bring to light those aspects which otherwise have not been studied. And objectivity is one of the most difficult values, practices that you can cultivate. It's very difficult to be objective. And I will definitely say that no human being is 100% objective. I am ready to be challenged on that. But objectivity levels are different. Many people are extremely prejudiced. They want to enforce their point of view. And I told you the field has many surprises for us. It challenges your ideological hegemony, as it is called. And I also told you what Goffman, says, that we are all actors. We are all, in some way showing different colors ourselves. You see, Goffman, as he said, when you're in the front stage, many times we conceal our identities. We are pretending. You are your true self, according to Goffman, only in the backstage. So, which means that when you yourself are, putting on several robes in different roles that you are playing, because human life is such that we play multiplicity of roles in multiple situations. But you must make a conscious effort not to be influenced, not to close your mind to reality. Even if it challenges your established ways of thinking, behaving, concepts, practices. Otherwise, how are new concepts created in sociology? Now you see COVID, for example, has brought into our discipline only a number of new concepts which we never ever imagined. Look at the word normal now. You say new normal. What is new normal? Now nobody is using that word. It is not new normal, but it is normal. Circumstances have pushed us into that stage, okay? And then you said super spreaders. Who are the super spreaders? We always said the poor, the migrants, the sexual minorities, sex workers, they are the super spreaders. No. Super spreaders are there all around us. They are right there in our own houses. So the whole idea that, migrants, especially the poor, you wanted to say COVID has spread because of the poor. Where? Has it made a difference between the rich and the poor now? Look at the mortality rates. So, and also, see, there is this word called shadow pandemic. Did anybody, when COVID, first came and hit us, think that there is a gender angle to COVID? Did you ever think that there will be a relationship between increase in early marriages and the COVID pandemic? Schools are closed, early marriages are happening, violence against women has increased. Now the whole concept of work from home has undergone change. So we cannot assume that any concept will remain like that, because realities keep changing. What is social research basically? It's a study of lived in realities. And lived realities are always, having surprises for us. Lived reality may be different from person to person, from village to village, from town to town, from city to city, and from one social group to the other. So the challenge, as I said again before I close, is to be objective. That means have an open mind. And if your prejudices are going to be challenged, accept it. There's nothing to lose. Your subject has everything to gain. Your discipline has everything to gain. Your society has everything to gain. Because even with regard to COVID now, everybody's talking about data being cooked up. And as a social researcher, there cannot be a better example to subjectivity than cooking up data. Objectivity is telling the facts as real. Okay, I'll stop here. Please, it's open. You ask me any question you want.
In case of subjectivity, it is said that we have to put ourselves in the position of the respondent.
Empathy, yeah.
So, subjectivity in case of we are doing interpretive studies or qualitative research. So, ma'am, here subjectivity is important also. But how is it possible to be objective even in putting ourselves in the position of respondents? We have to experience.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good question. See, being empathetic does not mean that you are subjective. In fact, I would look at it the other way and say, to be objective, we have to put ourselves in the position of others. Like you said, yes, it's very important for the researcher to put himself or herself in the position of others. Especially this is true when you are dealing with subaltern, marginalized communities, etc. Because we in our life will never ever come across those circumstances. Especially I always divide the academic world, the world itself in general, but the academic world into two groups. Those of us living in comfort zones and those of us living in not living in comfort zones. So if you have to understand the predicament, the life situations, the challenges, the realities that they face, you have to put yourself in their shoes. There is no doubt about it. But that does not mean that you have to be subjective. It will kind of give you the experience. See, for example, if the area where I worked, the forest communities, no? There, what happened when we started our work, and for years it was like that. There was no toilets because they culturally, they said having a toilet very, very long time. Finally, we succeeded in that. Is that they should come out of this thought. We got the youngsters together to impress upon them to agitate, and then they had a big showdown with the adults, the older members of the community who are opposing this, and got it done. Okay, why I'm giving you this example, the worst affected, by this situation were the women and girl children, especially in adolescent stage of their life. You'll understand what I'm trying to say. So if, like for people like us, who go there for 6 hours, 7 hours, we always stayed in forest guest houses where there were washrooms, there were relatively clean atmosphere where we could stay, live, etc. But unless we put ourselves in their position, how would it be? How difficult life would be for them in these circumstances? It would never have been possible for us to realize. So I agree with you that seeing life from that person's point of view is important, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to be subjective. I don't know. I hope I've answered your question.
I came across certain NGOs and other organizations who are working with these people.
Okay.
And what I get from their viewpoint, that
Mm.
they are also doing research, but somehow their intention is to blame the government of India because government of India is not framing any policy regarding
Okay.
them,
Uh-huh.
do not providing them citizenship. So what I
Okay.
feel, it is not the responsibility of India alone
Mm-hmm.
because it is an international problem. So
Right.
somehow I feel that these people, I don't want to name those NGOs and others, but somehow I feel they feel that though they are doing research on them, they have a particular bent of mind to thrust the responsibility of India on India.
That is because they are subjective. No, see, with all due
Exactly, ma'am.
respect, many NGOs who are working with groups like this, even with tribal groups, this is there. Because, I'm sorry, I also am sorry, with due respects to those who are doing good work, but that it has become a business in many cases. They are
Exactly,
getting
ma'am.
money, sponsorships, etc. And in order to continue to attract support, financial grants, and all that, they have to have a certain point of view. They have to prove that nothing is being done. If initially in many forest dependent communities, when you went, they used to have what I call the before and after pictures. So they would, show these tribals in tattered clothes, almost half naked, extremely dilapidated conditions. Then they say after we went, situations have changed. And the many of those international donor agencies got impressed by this and started giving money. On the contrary, you found that many of them became rich, many of them got what they wanted. So the voluntary sector, though I don't believe in the word non-profit sector because there is nothing is non-profit. But what is happening is you are very right. Their research, they also don't want the truth to be told all the time. They are very selective. Truth is told only selectively. They pick up.
Exactly, ma'am. Exactly,
Yeah,
ma'am.
it
Because
is a
they
selective.
don't want to highlight the negative sides of these people. They are always expressing their pathetic sides. They are suffering.
Yeah, because they are
experiences.
making money out of that. That's all straight away we can say. That is the reason.
Okay,
That is
ma'am.
why,
Thank you.
many NGOs, many state agencies feel very uncomfortable with social scientists. They say, oh, these people come and tell the truth. Of course, there are also people amongst our, group of academicians who have made compromises, who will speak what the government wants them to say, who will speak what a powerful NGO wants them to say, because there is a lot of money coming. Today for the social scientists, whether you call them economic experts, gender experts, poverty. There is a word called, poverty expert. What is meant by poverty expert? It bothers me because, these are very rich people, very well-to-do, extremely comfortable, who always stay and talk in the comfort of star hotels and call themselves poverty expert and make millions of dollars by giving advice on poverty to some of these agencies, including World Bank, WHO, and many of those UN agencies. So they will twist the facts, they will twist the data, they will make, truth is all concocted, as it is called. So such people are there in plenty. That is why they say NGOs need accountability today. They are not the ultimate. And you have thousands and thousands of these in India today, in every part of the country.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Any
So,
other?
somehow, ma'am, today research is also modeled by the power
Yeah,
and the
sure.
power of money.
Definitely.
So these things are
Definitely they
happening.
are. Yes, yes. Very few of them speak the truth. And truth is something very difficult to digest. You see, people who are objective make life for others uncomfortable. But being subjective, making compromises always pays. And that's how they do it. But that doesn't mean to say there are very great researches that have been done. So I don't think we should, go only on the negative side of it. Very good research which speaks the truth has led to lots of changes in our society. And that is the kind of research now we should all think of doing, especially this younger generation. They have to question, they should not compromise and bring out the truth. That is why we look up to them to do this. Okay?
Okay, thank you so much,
Okay.
madam.
So bye. Thank you. And then thank you so much. So I will be in touch with